Imagine a building that held the answer to every question humanity ever asked. The cure for diseases we're still fighting. Mathematical formulas we haven't rediscovered. The complete works of geniuses whose names we'll never know. It existed. The Library of Alexandria. And then it was gone. Centuries of human knowledge, erased in flames and forgotten. What if I told you that we lost more than just books? We lost centuries of progress. Lost forever gone. The technology, the philosophy, the science that could have changed everything. And the worst part, we did it to ourselves. Today, we're going to explore what was really inside those walls, who destroyed it, and what humanity lost that we may never recover. The truth about the Library of Alexandria is darker than you were taught. The dream begins. In 331 BCE, Alexander the Great stood at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. He was 25 years old and had already conquered half the known world. But Alexander wanted something more than military glory. He wanted to build a city that would outlast every empire. Alexandria, named after himself, of course. But here's what most people don't know. Alexander's vision wasn't just about power. He had been taught by Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age. And Aristotle had instilled in him a dangerous idea. That knowledge was the ultimate form of conquest. I am indebted to my father for living, but to my teacher for living well. Alexander died before his dream was complete. He was only 32, but his general Ptolemy inherited Egypt and the vision. Ptolemy I began what Alexander had imagined, a center of learning that would gather all human knowledge under one roof. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a library. It was humanity's first attempt to know everything. And for a brief moment in history, it worked. But what Ptolemy built would eventually become the target of jealousy, war, and destruction. Knowledge hunters. The Ptolemaic rulers had an obsession that bordered on madness. They didn't just want books, they wanted every book, every scroll, every piece of written knowledge in existence. They sent agents across the known world to Athens, to Persia, to India. These men weren't merchants or diplomats. They were knowledge hunters, and their methods were ruthless. Ships arriving at Alexandria's harbor were searched, not for weapons or contraband, for books. Any scroll found on board was confiscated, copied by the library's scribes, and the copy was returned to the owner. The original stayed in Alexandria. They stole knowledge and called it preservation. The library paid enormous sums to acquire rare manuscripts. They borrowed the official state copies of Greek tragedies from Athens, supposedly to copy them, and then kept the originals, forfeiting their deposit. If this resonates with your love of learning, hit like and subscribe for more forgotten history that shaped our world, because what these knowledge hunters gathered would change everything. At its peak, the library held an estimated 400,000 scrolls. Some historians believe it reached 700,000. To put that in perspective, this was more written knowledge than had ever existed in one place before, or would exist again for over 1,000 years. City of Genius. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a storage facility. It was the world's first research university. Scholars came from every corner of the ancient world to study there. They were given free housing, free meals, and access to every text humanity had ever produced. The only requirement: think, create, discover. And they did. Euclid wrote his Elements there, the foundation of geometry that students still study today. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth using nothing but shadows and mathematics. He was accurate to within 1%. In 240 BCE, Aristarchus proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, 18 centuries before Copernicus. Archimedes, though based in Syracuse, corresponded with Alexandria's scholars and built upon their work. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. The library had everything: astronomy, medicine, physics, literature, philosophy. They were mapping the stars, dissecting human bodies, calculating distances to the moon. This wasn't just ancient history. This was the future being born, and then slowly it began to die. The destruction didn't happen in a single day. It happened over centuries. The first flames. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria chasing his rival Pompey. He found himself trapped in the royal palace, surrounded by hostile Egyptian forces. Caesar did what Caesar always did. He fought. During the battle, he ordered his men to set fire to the Egyptian ships in the harbor. The flames spread. How far they spread is where history becomes uncertain. Some ancient sources claim the fire reached the library itself. Others say it only destroyed a warehouse of scrolls near the docks. Perhaps 40,000 volumes waiting to be shipped. 40,000. Even if it was just the warehouse, that's more books than most medieval kingdoms would ever own. But here's the truth that makes this story complicated. The library survived Caesar's fire. Damaged, perhaps. Diminished, certainly. But not destroyed. The real death of the Library of Alexandria was slower, more painful, and far more preventable. It died from neglect, from budget cuts, from the simple, devastating decision that knowledge wasn't worth funding anymore. But the flames were yet to come, and they would be lit by people who believed they were serving a higher purpose. Slow decay. The library's decline began with politics. The Ptolemaic dynasty grew weak. Rome grew strong. And scholars became inconvenient. In 145 BCE, Ptolemy Roman VIII expelled all foreign scholars from Alexandria. These weren't criminals or enemies of the state. They were the greatest minds of their generation, kicked out because they might criticize the king. Politics destroys knowledge. The brain drain was catastrophic. Scholars scattered across the Mediterranean, taking their expertise with them. Some went to Pergamon, which was building its own rival library. Others simply disappeared into history, their work unfinished. Funding dried up. The Ptolemies stopped paying for acquisitions, stopped paying for scribes, stopped caring. The library went from being the center of human knowledge to being just another government building with books nobody was reading. By the time Rome fully absorbed Egypt in 30 BCE, the library was a shadow of itself. Cleopatra reportedly received 200,000 scrolls from Mark Antony as a gift, but even this infusion couldn't restore what had been lost through decades of neglect. The death of knowledge begins not with fire, but with indifference, and indifference was just the beginning. Religious fury. In 391 C, something changed in Alexandria. The Roman Emperor Theodosius I declared Christianity the official religion of the empire. Pagan temples were ordered closed or destroyed. The Serapeum, the daughter library of Alexandria, which held perhaps 42,000 scrolls, was built around a temple to the god Serapis. To the Christian authorities, it was an abomination. They came with torches and righteousness in their hearts. The mob that destroyed the Serapeum believed they were doing God's work. They tore down statues, burned scrolls, smashed the accumulated knowledge of centuries because it came from the wrong religion. The Christian historian Orosius later wrote that he personally saw the empty shelves of the Serapeum, picked clean by those who considered the books dangerous. When you burn books, you are not destroying ideas. You are advertising that you fear them. This wasn't about Christianity versus paganism. This was about power versus knowledge. The same pattern repeats throughout history. When authorities feel threatened by ideas, they burn the books that contain them. The Serapeum's destruction wasn't the end of Alexandria's knowledge, but it was a turning point, the moment when preservation became less important than purity. Hypatia's murder. In 415 C, the streets of Alexandria witnessed something that still haunts historians. Hypatia was a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer. She was the last great scholar associated with the Library of Alexandria. She was also a woman in a world that was growing increasingly hostile to both women and pagan learning. Hypatia taught Neoplatonism, lectured on mathematics, and advised the Roman prefect of Alexandria. She was respected across religious lines. Her students included both pagans and Christians. But respect couldn't protect her from politics. Murder. A Christian mob, possibly incited by the bishop Cyril, dragged Hypatia from her chariot. They took her to a church, stripped her naked, and killed her with pottery shards. Then they burned her body. Her death marked the end of classical learning, In Alexandria, Hypatia wasn't killed for her beliefs alone. She was killed because she represented something the new order couldn't tolerate. A woman who thought for herself, who valued knowledge over dogma, who refused to be silent. Her murder didn't destroy the library. The library was already dying, but it destroyed something just as important, the culture that had made the library possible in the first place. What we lost? Let me tell you what burned. The complete works of Aristotle. We have perhaps 1/5 of what he actually wrote. The rest, gone. The plays of Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus. We have a fraction. There were hundreds more. Vanished. Scientific treatises that might have advanced human knowledge by centuries. Astronomical observations that took generations to accumulate. Medical texts describing treatments we're still trying to rediscover. 1. Complete histories of civilizations we know nothing about. 2. Mathematical proofs we haven't recreated. 3. Engineering techniques lost for millennia. 4. Philosophical works that shaped the ancient world. The hero of Alexandria invented a primitive steam engine in the 1st century CE. Just a toy, a curiosity, but the principles were there. If that knowledge had spread instead of being lost, the Industrial Revolution might have happened 2,000 years earlier. We'll never know what we lost because we don't know what existed. The absence of knowledge leaves no trace. We only know that humanity climbed to a certain height, then fell, and spent 1,000 years climbing back to where we had been. The Dark Ages. After Alexandria fell silent, Europe entered what we call the Dark Ages. It's not a perfect term. Light existed. Learning continued in monasteries and the Islamic world. But the organized pursuit of knowledge, the institutional support for scholars, the belief that understanding the universe was a worthy goal, that died with Alexandria. Progress stopped, reversed. For nearly 1,000 years, European civilization forgot things it had once known. The Romans built aqueducts, heated floors, concrete that lasted millennia. Medieval Europeans couldn't replicate any of it. They built castles with outhouses that dumped waste into moats while standing in the ruins of Roman bathhouses they didn't know how to use. The texts that survived did so largely thanks to Islamic scholars who translated Greek works into Arabic, preserved them, expanded upon them, and eventually passed them back to Europe during the Renaissance. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, but so much never made that journey. So much was lost in the transitions, the translations, the centuries of neglect. The Library of Alexandria represented a choice, to gather knowledge or to destroy it. We made our choice, and we're still living with the consequences. Lessons unlearned. Here's what keeps historians awake at night. We're doing it again. The pattern repeats, wearing different clothes but following the same steps. Knowledge becomes inconvenient. Funding disappears. Experts are dismissed as elitists. Books are banned. Ideas become dangerous. History whispers warnings that humanity refuses to hear. Today, we have more information than the Library of Alexandria could have imagined. Every smartphone contains more data than those 400,000 scrolls. But information isn't knowledge, and access isn't wisdom. We're drowning in data while starving for understanding. Libraries are closing. Research funding is cut. Scientists are ignored when their findings are politically inconvenient. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed by barbarians at the gates. It was destroyed by the people who should have protected it, by budget cuts and political purges and religious fanaticism and simple, devastating indifference. The fire that burned those scrolls is still burning. It just looks different now, and we're the ones holding the torches. The question is, will we learn before it's too late? The Library of Alexandria stood for roughly 600 years. In that time, it gathered the sum of human knowledge and produced discoveries that wouldn't be matched for over a millennium. And then it was gone. Not in a single catastrophic fire, but through a death of 1,000 cuts. Caesar's flames, decades of neglect, religious fanaticism, political expedience, the murder of scholars whose only crime was thinking. Remember, learn, protect. We lost cures for diseases. We lost scientific principles. We lost entire civilizations' histories. We lost the collected wisdom of humanity's greatest minds. And we lost something even more precious: centuries of progress. The Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, all of it was humanity clawing its way back to where we had been before we burned it all down. The only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. But it doesn't have to be true. We can choose differently. We can protect knowledge instead of destroying it. We can fund research instead of cutting it. We can listen to experts instead of dismissing them. We can learn from Alexandria's ashes instead of creating new ones. If you made it this far, comment Alexandria remembered to prove you'll carry this lesson forward. The truth is never comfortable, but it's always worth knowing. History has more to teach us. Subscribe if you want to learn what they don't teach in schools.